Her species absorbs memories through touch. Human protectors' haunted experiences leave her longing. The digital agreement hovered in the air before Mason, its sharp amber outlines flickering across his weary face. He stared at the hologram, every clause projected in cold, uncompromising detail. 4 million galactars. Enough to vanish. Enough to start over. All he had to do was protect an alien dignitary. The cantina was a cacophony of off-world jazz, laughter, and clinking glasses. Mason sat opposite his former supervisor, Darius, whose graying stubble and regulation jacket seemed out of place amid the neon haze and drifting holograms. Darius leaned in, the edge of his voice barely threading through the noise. "You're the only one with the right credentials, Mason. Viridian Royal Assignment. They asked for a human. Combat record." Mason let out a dry laugh, the sound lost in the din. The Titan skirmish. The Rigel rebellion. Memories pulsed in the back of his mind like old wounds. "Why would Viridians want a human bodyguard?" he asked, raising one brow. Darius's gaze flickered to the agreement, then back. "Politics are shifting. Earth's on the council now. We're players." Mason's grip tightened around his drink. He stared at the condensation beating on the glass, letting himself imagine, just for a second, the lakeside cabin in New Zealand, a place untouched by war or deals, where silence was sacred and the only sound was the wind through the pines. "What's the downside?" he asked, his tone edged with suspicion. Darius reached across the table, lowering his voice further. "No physical contact. Viridians absorb memories through skin. Touch the dignitary, you void the contract, and risk an interstellar incident." Mason's lips pressed into a line. "You're joking." Darius shook his head. "Not this time." With a resigned breath, Mason slotted the info chip into his neural port. Protocols and security files cascaded through his mind, maps of the Viridian consulate, encrypted threat analyses, staff lists, and then her image, Ambassador Zafira. Luminescent green skin, curved obsidian horns arching back from her brow, hair black as midnight falling in waves to her waist. Eyes the color of molten gold, bioluminescent patterns pulsing in shifting fractals across her arms. "She's the firstborn," Darius continued, his gaze flicking to Mason's reaction. "First Viridian to visit Earth in a century, and she's a target." Mason tore his eyes from the ambassador's portrait, suspicion returning. "By whom?" Darius shrugged, spreading his hands. "Not my department. They want a human because they suspect a traitor among their own." The promise of the cabin called to him, more vivid than ever. Mason closed his eyes for a heartbeat. "Fine, but if it goes bad, I want a way out." Darius's smirk cut through the tension. "Nah, just don't start a war." 5 hours later, Mason strode beneath the crystalline arch of the Viridian consulate, the city's nighttime glow refracted into 100 jeweled shards. His tactical gear had been traded for a tailored suit, black, understated, efficient. Every step echoed against the polished floors, drawing glances from Viridian staff whose eyes glimmered in the light, their expressions unreadable. He waited by the lift, the steel in his spine now more habit than comfort. His neural HUD pulsed. Proceed to residential wing. Ambassador awaiting. As the glass-walled elevator carried him upward, Mason looked out at a city transformed. Viridian spires, living architecture that twisted and pulsed with an inner light, rose among human skyscrapers, their forms interwoven as if the city itself had learned a new language. The lift doors opened to a corridor lined with pale, iridescent panels. 2 Viridian guards blocked his path, their ceremonial spears crossed. Their skin shimmered like emerald under the soft lights, their horns polished to a mirror sheen. "Your sidearm, human," one intoned, voice resonant and formal. Mason's hand moved reflexively to the grip at his waist. "Standard issue for bodyguard assignments," he said, holding their gaze. Before the tension could peak, a melodic voice swept through the air, soft, assured, unmistakably commanding. "He is expected." The guard stepped aside in perfect unison, and Zephyra appeared. Her indigo dress flowed around her like starlit water, and her skin glowed with a soft, shifting radiance, patterns blooming and fading in time with her breath. Horns arched elegantly from her temples, and her eyes, liquid gold, settled on Mason with calm interest. "Mr. Mason, welcome," she said, voice musical, each word measured with diplomatic grace. He nodded, careful to keep his hands by his sides. "Ambassador." She led him into her suite, a space layered with meaning. Viridian relics, all intricate crystal and metal, stood beside human sculptures, an ancient Maori carving, a sleek kinetic mobile, a blending of worlds, neither dominant, both carefully balanced. Zephyra gestured for him to sit, taking the opposite chair herself. "I trust your journey was uneventful?" "Eventful enough," Mason replied, his eyes already sweeping the room. 4 possible entries, 2 standard doors, a service hatch, and a ventilation grill just large enough for a crawler drone. 20 cameras, expertly hidden. The ceiling ducts. He filed that away. Zephyra's lips curved into a knowing smile. "You're evaluating our security." "Old habit," he admitted. "And your verdict?" He met her gaze, unflinching. 4 possible entries, 20 cameras, ceiling ducts wide enough for a crawler drone. She did not seem insulted. Instead, she nodded as if confirming something to herself. "Impressive. But let's speak plainly. There have been 4 attempts on my life this cycle." His jaw clenched. "That wasn't in my file. My cousin prefers to keep it quiet. The attackers used human tech." Mason's eyes narrowed. "Convenient," he said, the word edged with implication. He could feel the undercurrents, the game already in motion. Zephyra studied him, the patterns on her arms shifting through shades of blue and green. "I wanted a protector outside Viridian politics, someone my cousin, Regent Corin, could not control." "I'll protect you," Mason said, voice steady. "But I don't play politics." A flash of approval crossed her face. Before she could reply, his HUD strobed red. Perimeter breach. A cloaked figure, barely visible, moved along the outer wall, device in hand. "We may already have a problem," Mason said, rising, all ceremony gone as the old instincts kicked in. His hand hovered near his earpiece, eyes sharp, scanning for movement beyond the windows. Zephyra's expression shifted, composed, but now with a shadow of urgency. The night outside seemed to hold its breath. The diplomatic gala shimmered beneath crystalline domes. Suspended lights cast prismatic webs over dignitaries from a dozen worlds, their silks and scales and chitinous shells gleaming. Mason stood at the edge, hands folded behind his back, every sense sharpened by the pulse of danger he'd carried since childhood. His formal jacket concealed compact weapons, 2 stunners, a blade as thin as hope. But his real armor was vigilance. He moved through a haze of music and polite laughter, scanning for threats. Twitchy body language, strange clusters, the scent of nerves masked by imported perfumes. Lyra, Zephyra's attendant, materialized at his side. Small, quick-eyed, her own skin carried faint bioluminescent patterns, faded by time or rank. "You seem uneasy, Mr. Mason," she said, voice pitched low for his ears alone. Mason's gaze flicked to a group of diplomats from Cine, their metallic robes swaying with every gesture. "I prefer threats I can see," he replied, shifting the hidden stunner beneath his lapel. Lyra followed his eyes, her own expression thoughtful. "She was never afraid. until she started advocating for Earth. She nodded toward Zephyra, who floated from one conversation to the next, every inch the diplomat. Her gloves, midnight blue, lined with circuitry, shielded her from accidental memory absorption, the ultimate insurance in a crowd where secrets were currency. Mason watched Zephyra's careful movements, the way her smile lingered just long enough, how her hands never strayed near another's skin. She was poised, but tension lived beneath the surface, a coiled awareness, felt only by those who'd learned to survive on instinct. A ripple passed through the crowd. Regent Corrin arrived, flanked by 4 Viridian guards in ceremonial armor, their spears tipped with crystal blades. Corrin radiated cold authority. His presence sucked the warmth from the air. Mason watched the subtle drama unfold. Corrin's hand grasping Zephyra's arm, his grip tight, proprietary. Zephyra's posture stiffened, shoulders drawing back, chin lifting in silent protest. Jax, the chief of security, intercepted Mason. The man's presence was all edges, hard eyes, rigid stance, badge gleaming. "You're armed," Jax stated, accusation wrapped in protocol. Mason let his expression cool. "Your protocols are lacking." "You overstep," Jax shot back, voice low enough to avoid a scene. His gaze lingered on Mason's jacket, trying to read hidden contours. Mason didn't move. "My contract is with the ambassador. If you want to discuss security, start with the air filtration system. It's running a bypass cycle." Jax's eyes narrowed, but before he could retort, Mason's HUD flashed crimson. Unauthorized override, air filtration. A surge of data scrolled across his vision, vent pressure spike, chemical anomaly detected. Mason's pulse kicked up. He keyed the subdermal comm. "Possible gas attack," he signaled, already moving. The crowd blurred around him as he cut through the throng, scanning for Zephyra. She stood near a buffet, surrounded by off-world dignitaries, laughter on her lips. A mask, he realized now, worn for their benefit. A server approached her, moving with too much purpose, tray held perfectly level. Mason's instincts screamed. The server's eyes flicked to Zephyra, too intent, too precise. In one motion, Mason surged forward. The tray clattered to the floor, silverware scattering. A concealed blaster appeared in the server's hand. "Down!" Mason shouted, grabbing Zephyra by the shoulder and dragging her away. A pulse seared past, scorching the mosaic wall where her head had just been. Pandemonium erupted. Alarms blared. Lights strobed red. Mason fired back with his stunner, the shot catching the assailant in the chest. The server dropped, convulsing, but not before a second shot split the air, grazing Mason's arm. Pain flared. White-hot. Immediate. "Move," he ordered, voice tight. He hustled Zephyra toward a maintenance passage, shoving through a stampede of terrified guests. Blood ran hot down his sleeve, dripping onto the polished floor. Behind them, another shot rang out, closer, angrier. They turned down a narrow corridor lit only by emergency strips. Another assailant stepped from the shadows, weapon raised, a compact rail pistol, matte black, unmistakably human design. Mason lunged, tackling the figure hard enough to rattle teeth. They crashed against the wall, struggling. Mason drove his fist into the attacker's gut, twisted the weapon free, and smashed the butt into the masked face. The assailant collapsed, groaning. Mason checked the weapon, a human make, just as Zephyra had warned. He looked up at her, breath ragged. "Human make," he said, holding it up. "Just as you said." Zephyra's eyes flickered with alarm and something else. Relief, perhaps, that he'd believed her. They pressed onward. Jax's voice echoed down the corridor, distorted by the comms. "Ambassador, report your status." Mason ignored it, focusing instead on the coded panel ahead. Zephyra moved to the scanner, pressing her gloved palm to the glass. The door slid open, revealing a compact safe room. Steel walls, med kit, a filtered air vent humming softly. Inside, Mason slumped against the wall, adrenaline fading, pain surging to fill its absence. He pressed a hand to his wound. Blood seeped through his fingers, dark and insistent. Zephyra closed the door behind them, hands trembling as she activated the internal locks. The room seemed to shrink around them. "Let me see," she said, voice taut with urgency. "It's just a graze," Mason lied, but the numbness creeping up his arm told a different story. She knelt beside him, searching his face. "The toxin is spreading. I can see the capillaries. Rigelian neurotoxin, most likely. Please, I must treat you now." Mason shook his head, fighting the haze. "Protocol. No contact." She peeled off her gloves with deliberate care. "You'll die otherwise. I must touch the wound to analyze the toxin. I promise I'll be careful." He wanted to protest, but darkness lapped at the edges of his vision. Zephyra's bare hand pressed gently to his skin, her touch electric, a current that surged through his body and mind. For a heartbeat, Mason's world spun out, flashes of fire, the thunder of the Titan skirmish, screams, hope, loss, the cabin by the lake. Zephyra gasped, shuddering as she absorbed fragments of his past, her eyes wide with shock and empathy. "Rigelian neurotoxin. Variant 4. She breathed, voice far away, threaded with awe and sorrow. She reached for the medkit, hands moving quickly, drawing out a silver injector. She administered the antidote, then yanked her gloves back on, her breathing uneven. The venom's burn receded, clarity returning in slow waves. Mason blinked, the world coming back into focus. The safe room, the faint buzz of the filtered air. Zephyra kneeling beside him, her face flushed with emotion. "You saw everything?" he whispered, voice raw. "Pieces," she replied quietly, folding her gloves tight against her palm. "You saved lives on Titan. You carry so much pain." Her golden eyes searched his, a new understanding dawning between them. Something fragile, electric. Their silence was full. Shared secrets, wordless gratitude, the beginning of trust. Outside, the alarms quieted. Jax's voice crackled through the calm. "Lockdown is lifted, perimeter secure." Mason pushed himself upright, wincing as he flexed his wounded arm. Zephyra steadied him, this time gloved, her touch careful but no longer distant. "If my cousin knew what happened," she began, uncertainty threading her words. "He won't," Mason promised, voice steady as a vow. But those were human weapons, not human attackers. Zephyra nodded, her eyes hardening. "And we both know who stands to gain," she replied, her voice low. For the first time, Mason sensed a bond forming in the hush, a partnership forged in danger, strengthened by the secrets they now shared. Days later, Mason watched Zephyra in her private greenhouse, the filtered sunlight painting green-gold mosaics across her face, and the riot of Terran lilies she nurtured with careful hands. The air was thick with humidity and the sweetness of blooms, an unlikely sanctuary nested within the consulate's high security. He stood at the threshold, his arm healed but his mind haunted. The memory exchange had left a resonance between them, as if some invisible thread now bound his pulse to hers. Zephyra's fingers moved deftly among the lilies, coaxing petals open with a gentleness he recognized from battlefield medics. Not fragility, but control. She glanced up, meeting his gaze through a mist of pollen. "You dream of Titan," she said softly. "The children." Mason tensed, jaw tightening as he gripped the doorframe. "You weren't meant to see that?" Zephyra's eyes held a glint of apology. "Memory transfer isn't precise, especially in crisis," she replied, voice low and warm. You disobeyed orders to save them. Why? He looked away, tracing a crack in the stone tile with his boot. Because orders can be wrong. Bitterness edged his words, each syllable heavier than the last. They made sure I'd never get promoted. Zephyra stood, dusting pollen from her hands. She moved closer, the living tattoos along her arms shifting from emerald to blue. My people say human feelings are dangerous, but what I sensed was conviction. Violence, yes, but always to protect. Don't idealize it. Mason's tone was sharp. I've done things I regret. That's what intrigues me, Zephyra mused. The regret, the questioning. We remember, but we don't feel as you do. She took a step nearer, then stopped, remembering the rules, the distance they had to keep. A current hung in the space between them, made of memories, unspoken things. Sometimes, Mr. Mason, she said quietly, understanding begins with empathy. He almost reached for her then, before the sound of knuckles rapping the greenhouse glass broke the moment. Lyra appeared in the doorway, posture rigid. Forgive the intrusion, Ambassador. Regent Karan demands your presence. The Galactic Council is investigating last week's incident. Zephyra straightened, her poise shifting from introspection to authority. Her shoulders squared, chin lifting, the ambassador once more. Thank you, Lyra. I'll be there shortly. Lyra left, tension trailing in her wake. Zephyra turned to Mason, her voice low and urgent. Stay alert. My cousin will exploit this. And your goal? Mason pressed. He needed to know, needed some anchor in the shifting tides of intrigue. Zephyra's gaze lingered on him, something raw flickering in her golden eyes. Maybe I want to understand, she admitted. Maybe I want to choose my own truth. The words hung between them, fragile as breath. That night, Mason sat on the edge of his cot, half-armed and sleepless, when his neural comm pulsed with a coded message. Zephyra's signature, embedded deep. Meet me. Location attached. No explanation. He moved through the sleeping consulate, silent as shadow. The city beyond the windows glittered with alien and human lights, but here, silence pressed in, a hush before a storm. The archive was deserted, its vaulted ceiling lost in gloom, the only illumination a single band of blue light tracing the shelves. Zephyra waited near an ancient data console, dressed in simple gray, her hair pulled back, face unadorned. Mason closed the door behind him, keeping one hand near his sidearm. You called this meeting? Why here? Zephyra tapped the console, projecting a series of grainy surveillance feeds onto the wall. The footage stuttered. A cold medical chamber, humans in stasis pods, tubes threading into their temples. Viridian technicians moved among the bodies, extracting glowing filaments of memory. Mason's blood iced. Memory extraction. Human subjects? Zephyra nodded, her hands trembling. My father banned the practice decades ago, but Koran restarted it in secret. He calls them memory farms. Mason stared at the faces of the victims. Young, old, Terran, Martian, their lives siphoned away. How long has this been happening? Zephyra's voice was barely a whisper. Years. Koran's anti-Earth policies. This is the real reason. He uses the fear of humanity to justify these crimes. Rage simmered beneath Mason's skin. You realize what this means? The Council will do nothing if they see this as an internal matter, Zephyra finished. Unless someone exposes him from within. She stepped closer, desperation bleeding into her poise. I need your help, Mason. Not as a bodyguard, as someone who knows what it is to disobey for the right reasons. A beat passed, enough for Mason to see the cost in her eyes, the risk she'd taken in trusting him. Before he could answer, the console sputtered. Alarms shrieked overhead, red strobes painting the archive in urgent light. We've been found, Mason said, drawing his weapon in a single motion. Footsteps thundered in the hall, the heavy cadence of armored boots. Zephyra moved to the secondary exit, fingers flying over a hidden panel. The door slid open, revealing a shadowed service corridor. Together, they slipped into the maze of the consulate's underbelly, the alarms echoing after them. They ran through narrow passageways lined with pipes and humming conduits, Zephyra leading, Mason at her shoulder, scanning every corner for movement. His neural HUD flared, multiple contacts converging. Ahead, the corridor widened into a maintenance junction. Jack stood in their path, flanked by armed security, faces hard and eyes colder than vacuum. Jax's sneer cut through the tension. "Treason, Ambassador? I expected better." Mason stepped forward, leveling his stunner. "Stand aside, Jax. You're working for a criminal." Jax laughed, the sound brittle. "I take my orders from Regent Corrin. He's ordered your removal, Ambassador. And you, human, you're expendable." Zephyra raised her chin. "You're complicit. The Council will know." Jax's finger tightened on the trigger. "You won't live to tell them." Suddenly, a ruptured power cell somewhere nearby sent a thunderclap through the corridor. Lights burst, showers of sparks raining down. In the chaos, Mason seized Zephyra's arm, pulling her into the cover of a fallen support beam. Shots rang out, ricocheting off metal. Smoke billowed, alarms drowned by the roar of escaping gas. "Go!" Mason barked, ushering Zephyra through a side hatch as the security team regrouped. They dashed through the labyrinth, the consulate's inner workings now a battlefield, pulsing with emergency lights and the shouts of guards. At last, they emerged onto a catwalk above a loading bay, breaths ragged, eyes wild. Mason checked behind them. No pursuit yet, but it was only a matter of time. He looked at Zephyra, sweat streaking his brow. "We're fugitives now." She met his gaze, her fear and determination mingling, the resonance of their shared memories stronger than ever. "We have to stop him. Together." Their alliance, once a matter of contract, was now sealed by adversity. A fragile, dangerous hope that shimmered in the uncertain dark as they disappeared into the city, hunted but unbroken. They vanished into the city's industrial maze, breathless, chased by the specter of two governments. The rain came down in relentless sheets, drumming on metal awnings, gurgling in the gutters, veiling their retreat as Mason led Zephyra through alleys dense with neon haze and the scent of hot ozone. He moved with practiced precision, mapping their path against the city's forgotten underlayers, his presence a shield at her back. Zephyra followed, clutching her coat tighter, the chill of fear warring with the heat of adrenaline. At last, Mason ducked into a narrow passageway marked by a faded glyph. He keyed in a code on a rusted panel, the lock chirping in recognition, and ushered Zephyra into the gloom. The safe house revealed itself in segments: ferrocrete walls, battered cot, a battered table stacked with old ration packs, weapons stashed in shadowed alcoves. "Mercenary insurance," Mason explained, voice low as he secured the doors behind them with a series of heavy bolts and a biometric lock. He scanned the perimeter, checked the sensors, then nodded in satisfaction. "Hidden since the Sable Uprising. Only a few people know it's here." Zephyra's hands shook as she sat on the cot, trying to steady her breathing. Her bioluminescent tattoos flickered, betraying her agitation. "Your people will hunt you," she said quietly. "Mine will hunt me." Mason knelt to check a stashed medkit, then stood, his gaze steady. "We need proof." "My contact can help, but we move at dawn." He pulled a comm unit from a hidden compartment, fingers moving deftly to encrypt a message. "We're ghosts until then." Zephyra watched him, her expression distant, haunted by the memory exchange that still thrummed like a current between them. She studied his profile as he worked, the lines of fatigue and resolve. "You're not afraid," she observed, searching his face for doubt. Mason didn't look up. "Fear is useless. It clouds judgment." Zephyra folded her arms, shivering as the rain hammered the thin roof. The records show multiple sites, memory farms. The more vivid the human memory, the more addictive the extraction becomes. Yours were potent. Her words were almost a whisper, the air between them charged with the forbidden intimacy of their shared experience. He paused, glancing at her, a flicker of vulnerability beneath his stoicism. "They want memories with a pulse, the kind that burn." Zephyra met his gaze, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, of the danger, of the strange trust forged in crisis. Hours bled away, the storm outside shielding them from the world. At dawn, Mason's encrypted comm vibrated. His contact was ready. He pressed a battered jacket into Zephyra's hands, adjusted the collar of his own, and led her back into the labyrinth. The underground clinic was hidden beneath the shattered hull of an old transit station, where the city's arteries pulsed with steam and lost souls. "Doctor." Myron Solis greeted them with wary eyes, her hair bound in silver coils, her hands stained with antiseptic and hope. Mason scanned the dim-lit space. Cots lined the walls, machines hummed with muted urgency, and the air was thick with medicinal tang. Myron offered Zephyra a seat, then nodded to a figure curled in a corner, swaddled in a thermal blanket. "Jace Rowan," Myron introduced softly. "He survived the memory extractions. Barely." Jace looked up, his eyes glazed, a tremor running through his gaunt frame. "They took everything," he whispered, voice frayed as old wire. "I can't remember my mother's voice, my own name sometimes. The pain, always the pain." Zephyra knelt beside him, her face stricken. "I'm so sorry, Jace. I swear to you, this will end." He clutched her sleeve, desperation breaking through his confusion. "The Scarlet Station. Orbital, above Phobos. That's where they take the special ones. They said. They said the best memories are like red fire. I heard them. Viridian voices. And one, always one, who never showed his face." Mason squeezed Jace's shoulder, grounding him. "Thank you, Jace. We'll stop them." Myron glanced at Mason, urgency in her eyes. "I can forge new IDs, but it'll take hours. Security everywhere's been tripled since the consulate breach." Zephyra nodded, her regal composure wavering as she stood. "We have to get to that station. If we can bring back evidence, the council will have to act." Mason's jaw tightened. "And if we fail, we're just another set of memories for their collection." They waited in the shadows as Mirren worked, the silence between Mason and Zephyra growing dense with what was unspoken. The hum of the city above, the distant rattle of maglev trains, all faded into the background as she approached him, her armor of diplomacy stripped away. "I keep thinking about what I felt when I touched you," Zephyra said softly, her vulnerability exposed in the flicker of her tattoos. "The intensity, the pain and hope. If that's what my cousin is selling, I finally understand the addiction. It's not just memories. It's lives. Lived in a heartbeat." Mason leaned back against the wall, voice gentle for the first time in days. "Addiction makes monsters, Zephyra. Your cousin's not the first to find profit in other people's suffering." She hesitated, then slowly removed one glove, her bare fingers trembling as she extended her hand. "I need to understand again. With your permission." Mason nodded, his breath caught between anticipation and fear. Zephyra's touch landed on his skin, feather light, but the effect was seismic. Their minds aligned, the exchange carefully modulated, deliberate, emotions and images unfolding. Mason's first deployment on Titan, the loss of a friend, the impossible moment of peace by a mountain lake, the hollow hunger of regret. Zephyra's mind opened in return, sharing glimpses of her childhood in the Viridian groves, the pressure of royal expectation, the ache of being alien among her own kind. As she withdrew, both of them staggered, breathless. Zephyra's eyes shimmered with tears that did not fall. Mason steadied her, the warmth of her hand lingering in his own. They looked at one another, silent comprehension blooming, a bond no longer accidental, but chosen. The mission was now personal, the connection unbreakable. Whatever waited on the Scarlet Station, they would face it together. Phobos's orbital ring teemed with alien life. The terminal was a shifting mosaic of species and languages, Viridians gliding in layered robes, Martian miners in grease-stained jumpsuits, vendors hawking synth fruit and black market data chips. Through the kaleidoscopic crowd, Mason and Zephyra moved in careful disguise. Mason with his shoulders hunched, face half-shrouded by a trader's hood, Zephyra in human skin mask and diplomatic cloak, her signature bioluminescence subdued by tech mesh. They wove through the press of bodies, drawn toward Dock 14 by the promise of their contact and the last thread of hope. But as they rounded the final corner, a wall of armored security blocked their path, Viridian and human alike, weapons ready. At their center stood Commander Jax, his features grim, and just behind him, Darius stepped forward, eyes heavy with regret. Mason's hand inched toward the stunner hidden beneath his cloak, but Jax's soldiers were already raising theirs. Darius looked at Mason, his mouth twisted in apology. 4 million wasn't enough, the Regent paid more. A muscle jumped in Mason's jaw. He scanned for an exit, but Zephyra had already been surrounded. The two of them were wrenched apart, Zephyra's protests lost in the roar of the crowd. Mason struggled, but a stun rod jabbed into his ribs and the world went white. When he came to, he was in a cell of translucent alloy, light bleeding through seams in the floor. His wrists ached from the binders, every muscle protesting. The air tasted of antiseptic and recycled sorrow. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. The cell door slid open. Lyra appeared, cloaked in a maintenance uniform, her face tense with urgency. "The ambassador suspected Darius would betray you," she whispered. She left contingencies. She pressed a small device into Mason's palm, a neural override, compact and cold. "She's being taken to the Scarlet Station, not to Viridia. The Regent is there. He means to make an example." Mason's heartbeat thundered in his ears. "How do I get to her?" Lyra's eyes glimmered, both fearful and defiant. "Use this on the access panel. It'll get you into the service ducts. After that, you're on your own." He met her gaze, gratitude and resolve mingling. "Thank you, Lyra." She nodded and slipped away, the door hissing shut behind her. Mason wasted no time. He jammed the device into the lock. Circuits sizzled, the door popped open, and he was moving, his old instincts taking over. The Scarlet Station was a labyrinth. Corridors spiraled in impossible geometry, crimson lights pulsing along the walls. Security teams raced past, alarms wailing. Mason ducked into maintenance shafts, crawling through heat and darkness, every sense tuned to the echo of Zephyra's presence. Meanwhile, Zephyra was escorted down endless corridors, flanked by 2 burly guards. Her mind raced. Every footstep, every glint of energy shield, she mapped the route. Counting doors, measuring time. The moment they reached the containment block, she acted. Her hand flashed to her neural interface. Secret codes, planted long ago, flickered in her mind's eye. She pressed her palm to the wall, a subtle spark, and the cell doors lining the corridor slid open. Human captives blinked into the sudden light, confusion turning to hope as Zephyra's voice rang out. "Run! This way, quickly!" Alarms blared as the freed prisoners flooded into the hallways, overwhelming the guards. Zephyra ducked through the chaos, searching for Mason. Each face she passed, scarred, hollow-eyed, fueled her resolve. Mason, battered but relentless, fought through the confusion. He stunned a guard, snatched a sidearm, and pressed on, pulse pounding in his throat. The corridors filled with shouts, the thunder of running feet. At a junction, he nearly collided with Zephyra. Their reunion was explosive, a fierce embrace. Zephyra's hands trembling as she checked his wounds, Mason's arms locked around her with desperate strength. "You're alive," she gasped, tears standing in her eyes. "Never doubted you," Mason replied, voice rough. Flashes of their shared memories flickered between them. Titan's burning sky, the lilies in Zephyra's greenhouse, the agony of Jace Rowan's testimony. All of it had brought them to this. "We have to reach the broadcast center," Zephyra said, her determination burning bright. They navigated the chaos, dodging fire and falling debris, Zephyra's diplomatic clearance and Mason's tactical skills forging a path. At the broadcast hub, Mason hacked the controls while Zephyra transmitted the evidence. Video of the memory extractions, victim testimonies, damning documents, across every human and Viridian network. As the data spread, the response was immediate. Human workers throughout the ring began to riot, storming checkpoints. Viridian citizens, horrified by the revelations, turned on the Regent's loyalists. Whispers of injustice rose to a roar, the station fracturing as centuries-old obedience crumbled. Mason and Zephyra ran with the swelling tide of rebellion, leading a surge toward the heart of the memory farm. Survivors and defectors rallied to their side, armed with stolen rifles and raw fury. Energy blasts lit the corridors, smoke and sparks trailing in their wake. At the final barricade, Koran and his elite guards made their stand. Koran's presence dominated the room, tall, armored, obsidian horns gleaming. His eyes locked on Zephyra, voice venomous. "You betray your blood for these animals?" Zephyra's staff spun in her hands, catching the light as she advanced. Mason flanked her, his stunner raised. The guards moved as one, but Mason's shots dropped two before they could fire. Zephyra's staff arced, knocking aside another. Koran raised his own weapon, but Zephyra's voice rang out, echoing through the chamber and the open comms beyond. "No more will be drained. The age of stolen memories ends tonight." For a moment, time froze. The crowd outside pressed forward, witnessing the Regent's hesitation, his power unraveling. Mason stared Koran down, ready to fire. Zephyra's defiance was a beacon. The guards faltered. The crowd surged. Koran fell, overwhelmed by the momentum of revolt. Loyalists laid down their arms, the memory farm torn apart by furious hands. As the alarms faded and the dust settled, Mason and Zephyra stood side by side amid the wreckage, exhausted and triumphant. Survivors and rebels cheered, hope flickering like a long-dormant star. Mason met Zephyra's gaze, sweat and blood streaking his face. "We did it," she smiled, radiant in the chaos, together. Their bond, forged in danger and sacrifice, was now absolute, an unbreakable promise shining in the dawn of a new order. The revolution's aftermath reshaped the galaxy. The evidence that Mason and Zephyra had unleashed, images of memory farms, testimonies of victims, the faces of those who profited and those who suffered, could not be erased or denied. Old certainties crumbled. Across Viridian worlds and human colonies, the truth rippled outward in waves, changing the course of history. There were riots and reckonings, but also, slowly, reconciliation. In the new era, Zephyra led a reformist government, her presence a beacon of resolve amid the turbulence of transition. She stood before the Grand Council beneath the restored crystalline domes, her bioluminescent patterns now worn openly, a mark of pride and transparency. Human and Viridian leaders gathered, Old adversaries sitting side by side. The past could not be forgotten, but it would not be repeated. A new accord was forged, ethical memory sharing, voluntary and consensual. An agreement that honored the depth and vulnerability of both species. Humans would never again be harvested, and Viridians would be free to learn from human experience, not as commodities, but as equals. Council chambers filled with the sound of voices raised not in accusation, but in hope. Mason stood at the edge of it all. The marble floors gleamed, banners of both worlds hung in unity, and the air shimmered with possibility. He watched Zephyra as she navigated the council, dignitaries deferring to her judgment, old rivals forced to reckon with her quiet strength. His own role, so clear during the struggle, now felt uncertain. For months, he had been her shield, her shadow, the man who ran toward danger. Now the galaxy was at peace. At least as much peace as history ever allowed. What did a weapon do when the war was over? He lingered in the background, fading into the currents of diplomats and advisors. He caught Zephyra's gaze sometimes, an unspoken question always in her eyes. But she was needed by so many, and he had never been good at asking for what he wanted. One evening, as the city glowed gentle gold and green beneath the new peace, Mason found himself walking the edge of the council plaza. The air was soft, carrying scents of Viridian blossoms and Terran pines, hybrids planted as a promise that both worlds would flourish together. He paused at a balustrade, watching the city's lights flicker like distant constellations, trying to find himself in their pattern. Footsteps echoed behind him, measured, familiar. Zephyra approached, her presence luminous even without the ceremonial regalia. She stopped beside him, close but not crowding, and for a long moment they stood in companionable silence. "You've been more than my shield, Mason," Zephyra said, her voice low and clear. "Your strength guided us, even when I doubted myself. I'd like you to stay, not just as a guardian, but as an advisor. Help us balance justice and compassion. Help me build something that lasts." He hesitated, shoulders tense. "I always thought my place was beside you, to protect you from threats. Now I'm not sure where I belong. The danger's changed. I'm not sure I have a role in peace." Zephyra smiled, her expression softening. She reached for his hand, her fingers gentle as they brushed his knuckles. "Your scars can help us heal, not just mine, the galaxy's. You see what others can't, Mason. You question and you care. That's what we need now." He let out a shaky breath, surprised by how much her words mattered. "What if I fail? I've made mistakes. I still carry them." "So do I," Zephyra replied. "But we've learned, together. And now we have the chance to choose what comes next." Their conversation became a turning point. Mason accepted the invitation, not just to remain, but to participate. His perspective valued, his pain acknowledged, his hope ignited. The policies they forged over the following weeks were not perfect, but they were real. Memory sharing built on trust, on consent, on the acknowledgement that both pain and joy were meant to be shared, not stolen. That night, beneath the soft lights of the city, Mason found Zephyra waiting for him on a terrace. The sky stretched wide above, streaked with the pale green ribbons of Viridian auroras. Zephyra stood with her back to the view, her attention fixed on him alone. "Mason," she said, voice trembling just a little, "there's one boundary left to cross." He stepped closer, the old tension replaced by a gentle anticipation. She removed her gloves, baring her hands. This time, he did not flinch. Zephyra reached out, and their hands met in the quiet. The touch was peaceful. No rush of crisis or fear, but a balanced communion. Memories and feelings flowed in harmony. Mason's childhood by the Terran Lake, Zephyr's first night beneath alien stars, the fierce pride of survival, the humble gratitude of healing. He closed his eyes, letting her presence settle deep. "This is different," he murmured. "No pain, no hiding." Zephyra smiled, tears glinting in her golden eyes. "It's trust, Mason. It's hope." They embraced beneath the stars, not with the desperation of fugitives, but with the calm certainty of partners. Their connection was now both public and private, a living symbol for the galaxy, a testament that scars could become bridges and difference could be the seed of unity. In the gentleness of that moment, they realized they had planted hope for generations, human and Viridian alike. By sharing their true selves, honestly and without fear, they had given the future a new foundation, not just for peace, but for understanding, for empathy, and for love. Our story ends here. Make sure you subscribe, press the like button, and tell us in the comments what stood out to you the most in this video. Your feedback means a lot to our team. You'll discover many more captivating stories on our channel. See you in the next one.